Everybody, it's your boy Sad Nixon, and I'm coming at you today with another Secret Hitler tournament analysis video. Yeah, I know it's a little bit late, but I think this one is pretty interesting. So I'm looking into basically the results of the fantasy draft over here, the fantasy league, and as you can see, big ups to Star Crush. Star Crush was the winner of the fantasy league, getting a team that scored 143 points between all their players. And that's pretty awesome. Now, the highest scoring actual team only got to 130, so definitely got higher than that. And that is with the help of a few more games played than any of the actual teams got. The actual teams got 60 games, and Team Star Crush got 64. So, pretty cool for them. They got the win, and yeah, it was a cool event. I think it turned out really interestingly in kind of who got the top spots, who got the bottom spots, uh, and there was a pretty wide range of points. There were some people who got 90 and some people who got 143. That's a pretty big range. That's bigger range than the actual ending points in the tourney created for the real teams. So, that's to be expected, but I like that, people didn't just choose the same thing. People had some variety in what they picked. So let's get into the analysis. Okay, so what we have here is the teams, and we're sorting these teams by points. And so we see we have, Star Crush up here near the top, Morientes, Lobster, Ray, Tom. Uh, Tom actually drafted a team that was, I think, similar but slightly different to his actual tourney team that he drafted as captain, and that team actually got one fewer or one less points uh, than his actual tourney team. So that's a funny result. And this is despite the fact that they had more games played. They had 65 games played. But I thought it would also be interesting to take a look at who would have won the fantasy draft if it was decided by adjusted points. And what I mean by that is if you took the points that you got and then you divided that by the number of games that your players played and multiplied by 60, you kind of have a readjusted uh, amount of points that's more based on kind of the average amount of points that each one of your player got per game rather than the actual amount of points that they got in real life. So let's take a look at that. And looking at that, you can see Star Crush actually remains the highest out of the drafted teams, and Darren Morientes right behind. So those are the same. The top three would not have changed, which is pretty cool. However, Gio, who only got 15th, would have skyrocketed all the way up to the next spot, the fourth place spot. And that's because you can see Gio, got a pretty good 124 points, but his players only played 61 games, so a lot closer to, an actual tourney amount of games, and so his adjusted score was a lot more favorable. My score for my team also would have been pretty up there, just because my players only played 59 games. And so my adjusted points is even a little bit higher than my actual points. My adjusted points would be 120 in this case. So yeah, a little bit higher. That's pretty cool. Uh, and yeah, interesting results. Who would be at the bottom in this situation? Let's find out. At the bottom, turns out would be Ryan, Ryan Lockwood, Dev. Uh, his team got 94 points in the actual fantasy draft, but that was out of 65 games, so his adjusted score definitely goes down by a few points. Yeah, but the order looks pretty similar, so I don't think that the games played matter that much. A little bit. It mixed things up a little bit, but you know, not that much. I also did a calculation of what the correlation was between the games played and the amount of points that you got, and it was a 0.5 correlation, so a decent correlation, but not like crazy high. Now here's another interesting thing that I did. I actually went through and I redrafted the whole tournament based on the people's opinion. So what I did is for each round of the draft, I took like whoever got the most picks from that draft from the fantasy voters, and I put them first place in that round. And then the person who got the next most amount of votes or picks, I put them second. And then so on, all through, 1 through 7. And this is what it would have looked like. So I think this is a very interesting thing to look at, because this kind of presents an alternate universe of what if the audience was in charge of drafting and it wasn't the captains, and it was the audience deciding who was most skilled, who was least skilled. It would have looked like this. It would have been, we can definitely see some differences already in the first round. Medusa would have been first picked by Manu. In real life, he was only second picked, and it goes from there. Now, of course, if the audience were, totally deciding, then they might have chosen to put some people in totally different rounds than they ended up being in the end. But, this is just an interesting approximation of what they would have decided. And, this raises the question, okay, if the audience had chosen basically all the teams based on their opinion of who was best and worst in that round, which team would have won, right? And that is something that I also was able to find the answer to. So now we're assuming that the captains are the same for each of these teams, and the captains got the same amount of points that they did in real life, and they just got these players, which are different from the players that they actually got. Remember, the actual draft looked like this, so you can see a lot of differences. And this is, I think, a cool test of like how good is the audience at doing a draft. If the audience was in charge, because the audience was flaming the captains during the draft for drafting badly, but how well would they have actually done? And it turns out it would have been a very kind of different, but at the same time not that different result. Basically, the teams for the different captains would have played out sort of like this. So Monty's team would have gotten 115 points. Manu's team would have also gotten 115 points, and Dici's team would have gotten 112, and that would have rounded out the top 3. And so yeah, very interesting stuff there. Would have been very kind to Manu and Dice. And yeah, I guess that shows the power of kind of first and second pick, maybe you could say. But in any case, yeah, Monty, who already did really well, would have still done really well. And you'll notice that he has 115 points in this scenario, even though his players would have only played 58 games. Now, obviously, we couldn't know what that score would be if this had been his real team and they had played 60 games, but his adjusted points would also be the highest out of the crowd at 118.9. And down at the bottom would be Ashley, and that's the same as real life. And in fact, the points that Ashley would have gotten if the people had drafted her team is 93, which is the exact same as the points that her team got in real life. So I guess that goes to show, the people, they don't always know better. Even the hive mind of the populace can only do so well. And, this is, we do have to consider only 55 games played, so that is a disadvantage to that team just based on, real life playing out the way it did. But even, in the adjusted points, the team got 101 points, which is okay, but not great. Would have been bottom 3, it looks like, or bottom 2, actually. So, Ashley did pretty well in drafting compared to what the will of the people would have decided, I guess. And you also see at the top here, this is the consensus team. So this is the team based on the people that were picked the most in each round by the fantasy drafters. And that team got 117 points over the course of the tourney, playing 66 games. So, they did pretty well. It would not have, beaten that many people who actually did the draft. But it would have been an upper half score for sure, an okay score. So the hive mind did pretty well in that sense. Definitely pretty well. Now, I also wanted to talk about, you may have seen this when I was looking at things earlier, the optimal team. Because, of course, there's an optimal fantasy team that could be created. And you'll see at the top here, I have two teams. One of them is called Best of the Rounds, one of them is called the Optimal Team. And they are pretty similar, you will see, but there is a little bit of a difference, and that's because the team that's the best of the rounds is, you would think that that would be kind of the best, but it's not quite. Because under the rules of the fantasy draft, you are able to draft someone from a lower round into an upper round if you want. And usually that is not a great option because you kind of have to decide that there are two people in a lower round that are better than one person in the round above, and that is rare, but it did happen in this tourney. So the optimal team does 2 points better than the best of the rounds team by overdrafting wowest into the 13th round, so they can also draft zzRealGrizz for the 14th round. And it also, I believe, switches in uh, Shiro and Nooooot, who are both from the 4th round instead of taking Tyrox and Shiro. Yeah, and with those two substitutions, you get 2 points better. I believe 187 is therefore the best possible fantasy team that you could have drafted. And obviously, no one got close. And in terms of the people who even drafted some of those optimal picks, those teams didn't actually do awesome, surprisingly. Oops. So you'll see if we sort by the amount of kind of optimal picks that each team had, the team that had the most is actually Charles. So good job, Charles. You picked 5 picks that were ultimately the optimal picks. However, Charles only got 63rd in the fantasy tournament, and only got 108 points. So an okay score. But picking all the optimal picks is hard. Obviously, if you had gotten all of them, then you would have won. But no one got that close. No one got more than 5, and even the people who didn't do super awesome. They didn't win. That's really interesting to see. Now, I also wanted to take a look at how did the people do against random. So basically, if you just had a random number generator that was generating drafts, how good would those drafts be on average? And it turns out I did 1,000 simulations. They would have, on average, gotten 108 points. This is the distribution here. You can see. So yeah, they would have done, okay, I would say, just based on random. So, if you look at the final results, basically everyone above this point, the top 44 people, would have, gotten more than the average of random, basically. So, good job. If you're on that list, you did better than random would have done. And even if you did worse, that's okay. It's a lot of RNG, obviously, in this thing. But it is really interesting that Charles, who did get the most kind of optimal picks, did about as well as the average random team did. So, even if you get those optimal picks, it's not a guaranteed win. But yeah, that's a really interesting thing because it does show that just about, half and half of the teams were above and below, random. In fact, I think a little bit more than half were below the average random. So, yeah, make of that what you will. Make of that what you will. But yeah, very interesting stuff in this data. I think this is a cool event, and I do hope to put it on next tournament and maybe make it even better. Maybe add a system where instead of just drafting by rounds, you have like a money amount and you're taking from a pool of money to get people, and you can substitute in a bunch of, middle picks to get like another high pick or another 2 high picks, something like that. I'll think about it. But yeah, thank you for playing. If you did play, it was an awesome time. And yeah, I'll see y'all later.